Hello. Hello. Welcome. So, a longtime friend of mine asked me if I was going to tell an anecdote about my mother today in this welcome to all of you. And as I thought about my mother's life, Betita's life, I saw that I don't have one anecdote to share because it is a kaleidoscope of memories and stories. Brilliant colors, sharp and smooth edges, so many words, so much love. I can tell you that I am certain she would love this party. Yes. All of you celebrating her, yes, and together remembering and celebrating your distinct and shared history with her many lives. There are also many thank yous due today, but I would like to start by especially expressing my very deep gratitude to all of you who have made up the Betita fan club. It is not an exaggeration to say we could not have done it without you. Thank you. To start us off, I'd like to introduce one of my mom's favorite singers, who is also her good friend, Liliana Herrera, to sing one of my mother's favorite songs, Gracias a la Vida.
Buenas tardes. Y que viva Betita. Y gracias, Betita. Thank you, Betita. Thank you for gathering us here today, Betita. Te siento aquí en el corazón. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me dio dos luces que cuando los abro, perfecto distingo lo negro del blanco y en el alto cielo su fondo estrellado y en las multitudes allá yo veo a Betita. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado el oído que en todo su ancho graba noche y día, grillos y canarios, martillos, turbinas, ladridos chubascos y la voz tan tierna de mi bien amada. Gracias, Betita. Gracias, Betita. Me siento aquí. Thank you, Betita, for your words, the inspiration. Thank you, Betita, for your soul. Oh, I feel it today and every day. Thank you, Betita, hermana, madre, amiga, profesora, ay, escritora, Betita. Yo te amo, Betita. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado el sonido y el abecedario, con él las palabras que pienso y declaro, la de amigo, hermano y luz alumbrando la ruta del alma. Hoy te estoy amando. Gracias, Betita.
Well, was that a good way to start the program or what? No, gracias Liliana, Francisco, José Roberto. So beautiful. I know Betita's liking this program. Absolutely. I'm Olga Talamante, for those that we have not met. I'll be the MC for this celebration of our dear Betita. It has been an honor to be part of the planning committee with her daughter Tessa and longtime friend Tony Platt. It is very fitting that we're live streaming from the mission where Betita resided for over 35 years. I would like to offer now the land acknowledgement that comes from our local American Indian Cultural District. The Ramaytush Ohlone land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land, and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community, and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Land back. Land back.
I think she would like that too. I want to just thank the organizations that have provided just really invaluable support for this event, the Brava Theater for providing this beautiful space, Galería de la Raza for managing the live stream, and Chicana Latina Foundation for providing staff and resources for this event. These were organizations that Betita loved and supported, and vice versa. I was so fortunate to have met Betita in 1976 for the first time, soon after I had been freed from prison in Argentina. I remember she shared with me where we met for the first time at my good friend Ed McConn's home that he shared with Peter Barrett and Bob Barber. They were all very key in the campaign to gain my release. And so Betita came to visit. And I remember Betita sharing with me that she had literally stopped the presses and the book 450 Years of Chicano History upon hearing of my release so that the news could be included in the publication. We all know how thorough she could be, right? So she needed to do it. And of course, the first meeting marked the beginning of our long friendship throughout several phases of our lives. I treasure her guidance and example, her fighting spirit, and her undying optimism for a better world. And I rely on that example a lot these days. So today you will hear from Betita's many lives. Some who have traveled, friends who have traveled far from here, and others who sent statements about how their lives intersected with Betita's. So Tessa will come up to introduce the next speakers.
And one more quick thank you. The art over here, Shamari Smith is in the house, created this beautiful banner. The photograph was taken by my grandfather when my mother was about 12 years old. And the last photograph is one I took a few years ago. The first person you will get to hear from goes way, way, way back in all the best ways. Hold on just a second. Here we go. I will be introducing Constancia Dinky Romilly. She's a graduate of Oakland Tech. She connected with my mother, with Betita, in the 1960s, as both were members of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. These two continued their activism and friendship since then. Dinky and multiple activist movements over the past 60 years, most recently as an officer in the newly formed Putnam, Hudson Valley, New York, NAACP. Please welcome Constancia Dinky Romilly.
I hope that this is a very shaky step, but that I will not fall, which is good. I think EMS is right out there. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Guess I can take this off, see if I can do it without getting my hearing aids disrupted. A little prep here to get the eyeglasses on.
We're starting with the very important elders.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. When I met Betita in New York City in the 1960s, she was Elizabeth Sutherland, a brilliant, dedicated, stunning, charming woman. I was part of SNCC, and so was she. Elizabeth was in the literary crowd from Simon & Schuster Publishing and The Nation magazine. But she did more than extend invitations, give money, and show up at fundraising events. She used her inimitable skills doing the invisible work of editing many of our movement publications. Dorothy Zellner remembers Elizabeth's work on our pamphlet on the Danville events of 1963. Her contributions to the photo album, The Movement, and the reissuance of the 1965 Letters from Mississippi in 2002 are testament to her skill. My first vivid private memory of Elizabeth was at her apartment in the Upper West Side, the Upper East Side, I can't really remember where it was. The occasion was the first Super Bowl, January 1967. Who would have thought that Jim Foreman and Elizabeth Martinez wanted to spend that day watching football? Did they support the Green Bay, Wisconsin Packers or the Kansas City Chiefs? Did we discuss the racism contained in that name, Chiefs? Memory fails. I only know that they were enthralled, laughing and yelling, dissecting plays and evaluating players. Betita's dazzling smile filling the room as I sat bewildered at the entire event. In the late 60s and early 70s, Elizabeth worked closely with Jim Foreman on his brilliant autobiography, The Making of a Black Revolutionary, originally published in 1972. Jem acknowledges their close and warm friendship throughout the years and her invaluable assistance on this book. Elizabeth was able to be frank with Jem throughout the process, and he reports her criticism of his failure to discuss the theory of women's liberation in the context of the role of SNCC women. Jem was not an easy person to work with in those years. He had been poisoned by COINTELPRO operatives in the Black Panther Party in 1968 and lived with the resultant periods of paranoia for many years. Thanks to Betita's love and quiet persistence, they were able to complete the project. The Making of Black Revolutionaries is acknowledged as an unparalleled work on SNCC and would not have existed without Betita's firm hand. Julian Bond states in the 2002 introduction to Letters from Mississippi, quote, "No one wondered, what is the meaning of my life? It lay in what we tried to do and what we did. We were strong people and we did strong things. This is certainly true of Betita. And she did it all while gracing us with her radiant smile." Thank you.
Wow. Well, moving at lightning speed in a way, from New York and SNCC to New Mexico. I will first read a statement that was written up by Maria Varela, and then I'm so pleased that we have another comrade from New Mexico here in the house. Maria Varela, we met in the late 60s. She was part of all the efforts with the Tierra Maria Agricultural Cooperative, El Grito del Norte newspaper, and she has continued there for many years doing all kinds of very important projects. These are her words. And she actually knew my mother originally from SNCC. They were the only two Chicanas in SNCC. While different in our origins, Betita and I had the privilege of being formed by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the 1960s. SNCC was a civil rights organization of organizers who did not believe in celebrity leadership in order to make social change or get the attention of the media. This formed us into a people who took leadership from the community and committed us to holding up those unheard voices until they were heard. She raised an amazing amount of money for this organization of young people and developed networks of supporters that were there for us in so many ways. When SNCC was provided the opportunity to support the United Farm Workers Union in California, UFWOC, Betita strongly advocated for our involvement in the farm workers movement. I just learned this reading this. In 1966, when the union launched a 300-mile protest march from Delano, California to Sacramento, Betita was invited to speak, and she proclaimed the following to more than 10,000 farm workers and supporters. So hear her voice. "We are with you and are proud of your victory because it is a victory for all the poor of the world. It is necessary that Blacks and Mexicans see that there is only one cause, justice." When Betita came to work in New Mexico in 1968, she began publishing El Grito del Norte, which was one of 33 newspapers in Latino communities across the nation. She opened windows to worldwide movements against colonialism, educating us all about national and international compañeros in the struggle. When La Clínica del Pueblo in Tierra Maria, New Mexico, was burned, El Grito published photos of the burnt out exam rooms, and mail began arriving addressed simply to the clinic, Tierra Maria, with small donations and offers of volunteer labor to help clean up the ravages of the fire. This small, isolated northern New Mexico community was usually ignored, but El Grito made sure that those voices were heard. Betita's two books, 500 Years of Chicana History, published in 1976, and 500 Years of Chicana Women's History, published when she was in her 80s, resonated with a new generation of Latinos across the nation. In the Bay Area, she achieved an enormous body of teaching and communications work, which among her legacies created opportunities for cross-racial coalitions for change. So many of those most racist and oppressive forces we fought in the 20th century are resurging in the 21st century. Now more than ever, Betita's commitment to forging intergenerational, intercultural, and interracial alliances is essential. We cannot win without each other. Thank you, Maria Varela. Next up, it is my great privilege to introduce Sofia Martinez, my sister from another mister, whatever. We met many, many years ago. She worked with El Grito and many other projects. So without further ado, please let's welcome Sofia Martinez.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
You're all very solemn right now. Okay. I have to write things down because I can't go on and on forever, but I bring you greetings from New Mexico. I'm happy and privileged to represent some of the folks that work with Betita over the years in Nuevo Mexico. I'm also honored to be among friends and colleagues who I have met in passing and others whom I know from stories and your work. Richard Moore couldn't be here this evening and sends love to those he has worked with and supported in past struggles and times. Richard and Betita remained lifelong friends, political comrades, and family. Even in her last year, she spoke with him of writing about the Chicano movement's New Mexico Black Berets. Betita was extremely important and loved by those with whom she worked and the history they made together in New Mexico. Those who she taught and passed on her writing and analytical skills. New Mexico too was important to her and very much influenced her later life and work. Our lives are always constructed by our experiences. In Nuevo Mexico, Betita learned of indigenous and Chicano land struggles and the struggles of poor, rural, and mixed peoples who had and still live and struggle in unceded indigenous land in New Mexico for centuries in 3 different empires. It was Betita and the youth who led and published New Mexico to the world in our words and actions. She was a great leader and popular educator, organizing and collaborating with youthful and elder cadres of writers, organizers, and thinkers. This summer, we celebrated Betita's life work in New Mexico. It was a lively, lovely gathering in the backdrop of New Mexico geography, light, and the shared stories of lifelong friends and comrades who continue to keep her work alive. El Grito del Norte remains as one of the most important Chicano newspapers in the Chicano movement. 500 years of Chicano history in pictures is an excellent example of popular education and was produced and published in New Mexico. These continue to be important publications as well as her other prolific published work. All continue to be important and timely to our movements. After she left New Mexico with her mighty pen, she continued to support much of the work we have all been doing to build a multi-ethnic, multi-generational, multi-gendered, and the environmental and economic justice movement. But one cannot speak of Betita, however, without imagining her culture. I really thought of her on her beautiful indigenous blouses to the many skirts and white go-go boots she wore in New Mexico in her 40s. I know she had to have shocked many men of power and intellectual position at the time. Her ability to attract youth and build the power and skill that produced the work that she led in New Mexico is admirable and a model for us all. It is, after all, about creating an intergenerational movement. I'm happy also to be able to read a poem by Luna Davis, poeta, actriz, scriptwriter, just a wonderful, beautiful, intelligent person who now also rests in peace.
Que viva Anita!
Viva! If I can find the page, because I just lost it. 170, I think.
I'm papelitos.
I'm sorry. Okay, where was it? I just go to God's house, go to table of contents, huh? Let's see, it's very good piece here. 107 and 170. Okay, so this is a poem that, for those people that knew Anita Luna Davis, she was just a beautiful person to be around with, extremely gifted, and
crazy and creative. And so we wrote this poem together, but she is the author because she's the one that really had the energy and beauty for it all. Pollinating conciencia. Betita vuela en el viento, va desparramando semillas conscientes, semillas con conciencia. Las semillas caen sobre la falda de nuestra cultura. La mira, la madre tierra, se amachan, matas firmes, nacen necias, flores, hierbas, salvia, maguey y yuca se unen, se juntan y brotan. Por ejemplo, una cosecha de banned book clubs are ever steadily growing wherever books are banned. Y el viento, Betita, le dio aliento a uno de los libros más banned, 500 Years of Chicano History, because seedlings for justice spring wherever she walks. Natural pollination spreads as long as there is injustice and ignorance. Look, there, el viento, Betita, soplando, volando en el futuro. Muchas gracias.
Betita, presente.
So good to have you here, Sofia, to have that sweet voice from New Mexico. You know, it's so important for Betita. So the next presenter is someone that actually some of you hear from regularly. This is the coordinator of the Betita fan club. And those fans allowed Betita to remain in her home as long as she could, because she really wanted to. And to help her as she needed more assistance. She loved her garden apartment, you know, went right up 24th Street in Guerrero, and many of you visited there, I know. So just want to thank Tony for collecting and managing those funds. They were so important to support Betita. Tony first met Betita in the mid-1970s when she worked on the layout and graphic design of the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove. Some of you remember that. Tony was one of the co-writers. So he says it's been 50 years of friendship, excuse me, comradeship, Jen Martinez, and steaks, and many middle of the night calls. I think she probably called me after she called you. So, anyway, Tony Black.
So finally, here we are. We started planning this many, many months ago. COVID, you might remember, happened. So we didn't get to do this, but in some ways it's good that we've had time to really think about this and to reach out to you and to have people come from many different parts of the country and either in person or to send messages. So I wanted to start off by also mentioning two people who would have been here if they hadn't recently died, and I'd like to acknowledge the work and commitment of Suzanne Jonas. Suzanne Jonas presente.
Presente.
I'd also like to acknowledge the lifelong work of Mike Davis, who recently died. In fact, if Mike was alive, he'd be here and he'd be telling you that he's known Betita longer than anybody except for Tessa, because he was at a Wall Street demonstration with her when she was in the early days of SNCC, and she always used to refer to him as that little boy, Mike. So Mike, Mike gave all these incredible interviews and conversations before he died, and knew he was dying. And one of the messages he left, I thought, expressed the spirit of who we are here today. So this is Mike Davis. What keeps us going ultimately is our love for each other and our refusal to bow our heads, to accept the verdict, however all-powerful it seems. It's what ordinary people have to do. You have to love each other. You have to defend each other. You have to fight. Mike Davis. In addition to this being a commemoration of Elizabeth, Liz, Betita, Sutherland, Martinez's many lives, it is also, as Betita expects and demands, in fact, she called me at midnight last night to remind me, this is also an intergenerational exchange. It's a summing up of political lessons learned, and it's strengthening ourselves for the struggles ahead. My God, we need that. Oh, and Betita reminded me, she said, and also to have a ruckus of a good time. That's her phrase, a ruckus of a good time. She had an incredible way with words. It was a surprise to me, in fact, that her first publication in 1960, I don't know if anybody here knows this, but her first publication in 1960 was the translation of a French novel.
Wow. Wow.
So let me start. I have the privilege today of introducing three people who are very much alive and can't be here and send messages. And the first person is Chute Allen, sometimes known in the past as Pam Allen. Chute Allen first started working politically with Betita in 1989 when they helped to form the Bay Area veterans of the Civil Rights Movement. But they met, so to speak, for the first time in 1964, when Chute Allen wrote a letter to her parents about her experience as a school teacher in the Summer Freedom Project in Mississippi, a letter which Betita published in her memorable Letters from Mississippi, published in 1965. It's been republished recently, but this is a very extraordinary book. What's interesting about Betita, and you learn a lot from this, is that if you try to find any information about then Elizabeth Sutherland, you know, at the front cover here, or the bio, there is nothing. There is nothing about herself here. Except she does write a little editor's note in which she thanks SNCC for the support of this project. And then she says, and finally, a special word for Tessa, age 11, who endured many lonely hours and TV dinners while this book was in the making. She understands about Mississippi, right? She understands. So in this book, which is rather extraordinary that Betita did this, she tracked down people who worked in the summer project, and she tracked them down and asked them had they written any letters home, which they did. They wrote home letters to their parents. And they wrote, and then she collected those letters and created this book of those letters from the activists, predominantly white activists, who went to Mississippi in the 1960s. So here she is. I found her letter in this book under the name Pam that she wrote in 1964. She said, every class is beautiful. She's a teacher. The girls respond, respond, respond. You can see why Betita liked the way she wrote. Okay? The girls respond, respond, respond. And they disagree amongst themselves. And I have no doubt that soon they will be disagreeing with me, writes Jude in 1964. This is the one thing I'm working towards. I have a great deal of faith in these students. I really think that they will be able to carry on without us. She wrote that in 64. So here, 58 years later, this is Chute Allen writing for us today. She says, Betita and I were active together in the Bay Area veterans of the Civil Rights Movement. In 1989, a group of us organized the 25th commemoration of the Mississippi Summer Project, popularly known as Freedom Summer. We asked Betita to facilitate the gathering. That was the beginning of our working together. We then organized a tour for Jim Foreman to speak both in college classrooms and at a movement commemoration event where, again, Betita facilitated. I learned a great deal from Betita's meticulous work style and political clarity. Betita created this book, Letters from Mississippi, in the summer of 1964 from the letters of freedom school teachers and voter registration volunteers, and made a cohesive, highly readable, and very moving account of a collective experience, a very challenging intellectual project. She showed how the predominantly white volunteers were anti-racist allies of the Black-led Southern Freedom Movement. It was the first time something I wrote was published. When I doubted my ability to write my thoughts during the early women's liberation movement, I would remember that Betita had thought highly enough of my writing to include excerpts from my letters in her wonderful book. I think this speaks so typically of Betita reaching out to people and nourishing young people's talent. Thank you, she says. Thank you, Betita, for encouraging me and other white women and men to stand tall in the struggle for equal rights and freedom. It was a privilege to work with you. So that's from Margaret Randall's message. Sorry, that's from Jude Allen's message. The second message is from Margaret Randall. This is from Margaret Randall, another extraordinary comrade of Betita's, who, like Betita, was an internationalist and is an internationalist and anti-imperialist. Both are multi-talented. Maybe you know Margaret Randall's writings, her essays, her poetry, her photography, extraordinarily widely talented. Both are multi-talented. Both were very much and are dedicated to the written word. Both are fierce feminists, and both are fearless. And both share a spiritual homeland in New Mexico. Margaret Randall sends us this message. Betita Martinez was one of those people who changed as changing times demanded. She was always on the forefront of curiosity and struggle. From her early book about the Cuban Revolution through the northern New Mexico land grant era, and then the important issues she faced and often led in California. She was perceptive and wise about Chicago, about Chicano scene, and she produced books about its history that continue to be enormously relevant. Over the years, I learned a great deal from her writings and from her example. But most of all, she was a friend. We visited for the last time a few years before her death, when my wife Barbara and I were in San Francisco and went to see her there. At that point, her memory wove in and out of the present time, but we managed to recall good times and struggles together. I think of Betita as one of the beacons of my generation, a woman who spoke for many in a voice many more could hear. I think that's such a striking comment about what Betita's life stood for. A woman who spoke for many in a voice many more could hear. Those of us that spend our lives doing research and writing wish we could write in such deeply researched ways, in a way that communicate with such a large audience. I wish I could be at this memorial, she continues. The fact that I cannot be is all the more disappointing because I was also unable to attend those held in New Mexico, the state we shared. But I'm with you in spirit, celebrating a great woman and a precious friend. Thank you, says Margaret Randall. The third message from New Mexico, from Taos in New Mexico, comes from John Nichols, a longtime friend of Betita and Tessa's. Of course, many know of him as the author of the New Mexico trilogy, especially the Milagro Beanfield War. You've all read that, or many of you read that? Yes. Yes. But most people don't know about Betita's role in ordering John Nichols. Yes, some of you know Betita.
Oh, yes.
Many of you don't know about Betita's role in ordering, those are my words, by the way, in ordering John Nichols to learn New Mexico's history, and in John Nichols' words, challenging my politics or lack of the same. She helped to shape my opinions and ideals. He wrote this in 2013 in this collection of memoirs that some of you managed to receive today. So today, John Nichols sends us this message, which is titled What I Learned from Betita. He says, Betita was one of the first people I met after I left New York City and arrived in Taos, New Mexico in July 1969 at the age of 29. I already knew something about Betita because for months in New York, I had been buying her radical paper, El Grito del Norte, at the 8th Street bookstore in Manhattan. How El Grito got to that store, I have no idea. Maybe my friend and Betita's pal, Jim Foreman, and his wife, then Dinky Foreman, who lived near me, received the El Grito in the mail from Espanola and New Mexico and made the deliveries to the bookstore. True or not true? We don't know? You don't know that. Sitting on a bench in Washington Square, I read the paper from back to back, getting an education in the land grant struggles in New Mexico, and also learning a lot about New Mexico history, its struggles for justice, and the multiple aspects of the Chicano movement. I learned before I ever moved here that the land of enchantment It was also a land of inequality, a lack of social justice, extreme poverty, and a terrible place to raise kids. But it was also a place that had a rival sense of humor and a wonderfully eclectic mixture of cultures with strong Native American, Chicano, and old-fashioned Anglo influences. I don't remember the first time I walked into the El Grito office in Espanola, an hour south of Taos, but as I recall, the office was an unholy, cluttered mess, filled with a bunch of wonderful people who would change my life and also give me an undying hope for great and positive changes in the future, which I'm still hanging on to for dear life 52 years later. I recall those El Grito days as a revolution with a smile. One of Betita's mottos that became my own war cry way back then has always encouraged me and stayed with me all the rest of my days. It was pretty short and sweet. Adelante siempre, patras nunca. Forward always, backwards never. I love that expression, and I always will. I've tried to wake up every morning for the last 52 years with those words, the first things I think about, even at my current age of 82, the minute I struggle out of bed and start another day by putting my false teeth in my mouth, getting my hernia belt on properly, and drinking a can of Boost. Betita's slogan motivates me to never despair or give up, and to always find joy and meaning and humor and courage in every moment that I spend on this planet. Put simply, I love you, Betita, and I thank you for everything. So thank you to those three people for their messages. I mean, they tell us facts about Betita, but they give us the spirit, don't they? Which is such an important part of trying to remember these many lives that she lived. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce somebody who's actually here with us, and also Angela Davis, who's now going to talk to us. But Angela Davis is among the very small number of people here today who has known, or to be more accurate, I should say, who has not known Betita Martinez since 1964, when, as an editor for Simon & Schuster, Liz Sutherland, as she was then known, and Angela will probably tell us that she didn't put together Liz Sutherland with the later Betita Martinez. But at that time, Liz Sutherland acquired and edited this extraordinary book that many of us remember and have studied, and this is, I think, Betita's copy that's sort of gone through many, many times. The Movement, a documentary of a struggle for equality, 1964, extraordinary book of photographs and so on. And this was, it had many famous photographers in it, and movement photographers who are all named at the back. It has an introduction by Lorraine Hansberry, who's listed on the front here. Betita acquired the book for Simon & Schuster, convinced them that they should publish this, contacted all the photographers to get the photographs in it, supervised the whole project and edited it, and yet her name is not anywhere on this planet. So that says something about Betita, you know, putting the common good before her own, but it also says something about the publishing industry, doesn't it?
Yeah.
As Angela wrote in 2013, this book and other writings that Betita did in these early days when she didn't realize that these two people were the same person, she said, "These writings helped me to understand and shape my understanding of the world." Later on in their many lives also, Angela Davis and now Betita Martinez found common ground in their work for Black-Brown unity, in supporting anti-imperialist struggles, in making sure that women hold up at least half of the sky, in their commitment to the vital importance of ideas and education, and in a courageous willingness to put the social good above their own personal careers and safety. Please welcome Angela Davis.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, there's so many stories I could tell, and Tony, thank you for referring to the fact that the book, the movement, was one of the books that I consider that helped shape me as an activist very early. And then later, I read The Youngest Revolution and had no idea who Elizabeth Sutherland was. And so it continues. I could tell that story, but actually in the wonderful edition of Social Justice that Tony edited, your name is on that one, isn't it?
Yeah.
I write about the fact that later I realized that I could use Betita's writings and her activism as a way of charting my own journey. Elizabeth Betita Martinez has been and continues to be an incomparable source of light, insight, inspiration, and courage for all of us who believe that a world embodying the principles of peace, justice, and freedom is possible. But Betita also knew, and some of us are just catching up with her now, that such feats of imagination are never possible if we fail to learn how to create, experience, and share joy with one another and the world. Whenever I conjure memories of Betita, she has that enormously infectious smile on her face that all of you, of course, know, punctuated by the bright lipstick that she always loved to wear. And that smile makes me remember how consistently Betita exuded her own special joie de vivre, which is not, of course, to minimize the importance of her rigor and of her always serious purposefulness. I know that in these few minutes, I cannot even begin to do justice to her myriad accomplishments as an organizer, an instigator, an activist, as a thinker, writer, and teacher, as a pivotal figure in the Chicana Latina movement, in the Black liberation movement, and in the anti-racist, anti-capitalist feminist movement. That's a lot. But what have I already left out? Her work against colonialism in Africa, her solidarity with the Cuban Revolution, her never waning insistence on anti-imperialist practice, her critique of the border, whether separating nation states, racial communities and cultures, or ideological borders, producing oversimplified and enormously misleading binaries. What else have I left out? Her work bridging communities, ideas, differences, and these don't even begin to represent the vast canvas of her life and work. There is so much more, so much more. But what is certain is that she always attempted to create ways of acknowledging and understanding affinities and differences, recognizing that the latter was sometimes more important than the former to the process of bringing people together. And this seems to recapitulate what Toni Platt reminds us that she wrote as a 16-year-old. And I just love this statement. Something in me, she wrote, wants to make people all over the world love each other. And Mike Davis expressed similar sentiments. Something in me wants to make people all over the world love each other and know each other and laugh with each other. And so I want to close with the memory of that smile we all know and that laughter that always seemed to create sonic pathways leading to worlds we have not yet figured out how to dream.
Thank you so much, Hermana Angela. Thank you so much for your words. It just brings me even personal comfort to have you in terms of not having Betita here, having you here, because you have her with you. And I know we were talking earlier that you had been in San Antonio and people were talking about Betita. And the times that I've been fortunate enough to be with you in activities, when we sat here in the Bravo Theater in conversation, Voices of Resistance, I think it was called, and we talked about Betita, right? When the brown folks for Black Lives, we met in Oakland, and you talked about Betita because the two of you, I think, really forged this path that we're trying to follow in terms of solidarity among our movements and among our peoples. And I have to say, I know people probably are sick and tired of the LA incident, the politicians and what they expressed, which is really how white supremacy has seeped into our communities and into the consciousness of those that are supposed to represent us. And it shows that we have so much work to do to combat within our community anti-Blackness, anti-Indigenous sentiments, and we're here to do it, and we are going to do it. And you and Betita have to enforce that path, and we'll follow it. I'm really glad to bring up someone that has known Betita for a very long time. Her own work, the Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States, is just well known and awarded. She was an author, an activist, and a longtime friend of Betita, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz.
It's so good to see these faces, all of whom love and admire Betita. Sister, colleague, above all, a mentor. Betita was my best friend, and I miss her terribly. We first met in August 1969 in Albuquerque at a demonstration she had organized at the courthouse where two Hispano activists were on trial in the land grant struggle. The friend I was with knew Betita and pointed her out among the crowd. I was stunned by her beauty and grace, like a symphony conductor organizing the crowd, her whole body in motion, her arms out, that bright white smile lighting up like a magnet. I knew Betita as a co-founder of the first radical women's liberation group in 1967, along with Shalema Firestone, Allen, and others in New York. I co-founded a feminist group in Boston the next year, but Betita had already moved to New Mexico to support the Hispano land grant movement. Betita became a Chicana, a great gift to that movement. I spent 2 days in Hispaniola, where Betita lived, and also met the beautiful teenage Tessa there, who's also a lifelong friend now. In that time, I learned about the land movement and met many of the young people, especially the young women she was guiding. We talked of the women's movement and how it was going in a sort of apolitical direction. We always stayed in touch, but it wasn't until the mid-1980s that we both were living in San Francisco, not far apart, going to the same endless meetings, demonstrations, organizing. I was a professor at Cal State Hayward and was able to get Betita a lectureship in women's studies. She was beloved by our students, especially the young women. But it wasn't all movement and work. We were both movie fans and usually saw at least one movie a week together, talking into the night about it afterwards. We were both writers and avid readers and talked a lot about writing and what we were reading. In addition, she was a brilliant editor and generous with her skills. I didn't know how she had time to write, being much in demand and always available to the young people who gathered around her. Betita lives in my mind. I constantly ask myself, what would Betita say? What would Betita do? Betita made me a promise to never ever call the United States America.
Yes.
Yes. Clearly an imperialist designation that US people claim the Western Hemisphere. Also, I was to correct people when they did this. It's very hard with an editor when I'm writing, this is clumsy. Well, sorry, it has to be that way. I have followed her instructions, and I hope you will as well.
Thank you, Roxanne, and thank you for reminding us
Yeah.
what we need to do. And you mentioned, Roxanne, of the young people that just lived to be near Betita, who learned from her, who gave her so much as well. We're so glad to have one of those young people. Jesus Barraza is a printmaker and graphic artist who credits Betita as do Melanie Cervantes and Fabiana Rodriguez, big names, right, in our art world, and for launching their careers as artists and activists. According to Jesus, who first began working with Betita on Shades of Power, the newsletter for the Institute for Multiracial Justice, he says it was my first big break and an honor to work with her, thus starting my career as a designer and an artist. Please welcome Jesus Barraza.
It's funny because as I was waiting to come up here, I just realized I didn't send anything to all of them, sorry. Up here, and this was always kind of like a thing that was happening whenever I was going over to Betita's, and I don't know how many people remember walking through that little hallway in that metal gate.
Yeah.
And pressing that button, I was always like, what button do I press? But it was such a thing, I was always like, damn, what did I forget? Who did I forget? Because I was always working with her on some project. And this was that the experience of walking that little hallway eventually became like this weekly thing. And it's initially, as Olga was talking about, this all started with Shades of Power. And I remember the first time that there was a friend who was like, "Oh, you do graphic design?" I was like, "Yeah, I do postcards." And that's what it was. I knew how to use a computer back then, which was a jump from like Betita's day of cut and paste and everything, right? And luckily, I also learned to cut and paste, so I knew what she was talking about when we were VIDAS. But I had been told, yeah, there's thing in Institute for Multiracial Justice, Angela Davis, all these names. I was like, oh shit, Betita, oh my God, never got to meet Angela though. It was important to me because I was a student. I was at San Francisco State, and this was before I met her. I knew Betita, I'd seen the books, and 450 years of Chicano history, and Rito Norte, I would go to the library, I would like between my classes, I'll have 2-3 hours, and I would go and I would check out the microfiche. Yeah, people remember microfiche, right? And I would look through it, I would go through all the Ritos in Norte every week. I would go and I'd check them out, and I'd read through them, and I'd read the articles, look at the art, look at the layout, and think of, you know, what decisions was she making? And so to me, like that was my education. So going to work with her on Shades of Power was just amazing, because it was learning about the way that she made decisions, which sometimes were so funny, because we would always come down to like, well, this word right here. I was doing the layout, so I would always have to like, she would give me the pages with corrections, and we would go through them, and I would, like the ones that I would mess up, and we'd have to do them over again. But it was a picture, you know, right? It was the pictures and the images, the stories. How did this all work together? And Shades of Power was really important for me, as I said. It like made me a graphic designer. It gave me a job. It was weird. It gave me a paying job for the first time. It made my mom say like, "Oh, my son, he works with computers." It was funny. Eventually, I became the artist in San Francisco, which sounded like some misanthrope, but it was just so hilarious. But eventually, this all led to working on one of the most important projects of my life, the 500 years of Chicana women's history. And I know I'm not getting the name exactly right, but that's the way I say it in my head, because to Betita, words were important. Images were important. How much time we spent, and even if you know that book, sometimes there's like paragraphs. And those paragraphs were important. We would go over that paragraph. I would come in, I would make changes, I would come in, because truly, you're gonna hate me, but I just learned this. We have to change this again. And I was like, just let me know what we gotta change, Betita. And it was the same thing with images. It was like, oh, this image came, I got this image, I tracked it down, we have to change this image. We would talk, what's more important, truly, this image or this image? I don't know, I mean, we get into it, and that's what I love. I like, now as a poster maker, right, as someone who's like bringing images, messages, text together, it's like, she helped me understand the importance. When I have just those sentences to say something, she made me understand the importance of language. As a professor, when I'm reading my students' work now, right, and I'm like, this word right here, like you just got to change this, because it changes the whole understanding of what you're trying to say. And so these were the things that I remember. These are the things that I take with me every day. But I think, of course, right, I think just how lucky I was to work with her on that project. It took us like 3 years. I think it was supposed to take us like a year. I don't know, it took us, I don't know, lost count of the years. But it took the time that it needed to take, right? And I say that as how important that as a document is. So it's one of our new people's codexes. That's the way I see it. The 450 years and 500 years of Chicana history, these are our people's codexes for today, right? And to me, it's just, you know, I just learned so much from her. And I think, you know, I talked about the graphic design and all that stuff that I learned from her. But I think the thing that I hold so dear to me, and I've told my partner Melanie about this, and this experience one time, when you came into Betita's house, there was a dog. It was so cheap. Oh, yeah. Always having to like, it was so to jump all over you, to a big dog too. Having brownie bites with her, with Betita, and talking about her history. I remember talking about her going to Wounded Knee. But I think the thing I remember was the little bears. I people remember the little bears. Those little bears. And then I remember when there was a wedding for the bears. It was like, I think it was Yuriko Shiyama and her bears and Betita's bear is the thing I'm married. And I was just like, all right, Betita. Like, it challenged me. As a dude, as someone who, like, I remember making clothes for my He-Man with my grandmother, all of a sudden this, like, brought something back to me. And I think that's probably the most important thing I learned from Betita is that, like, no matter, you know, as a revolutionary, right, as this thing that is so chingon, right, no matter how old you get, you have to stay in touch with that little kid in you, right? Chet talked about the revolutionary spirit and how love's involved in it, right? And I think Betita taught me how, like, yeah, love is important, but also to have that spirit of you being a little kid, of what it means for you to have an imagination, to be able to play, to be able to stay in touch with that. That's the thing that I'll always carry on from Betita. And to me, is like, now one day, I hope to have a wedding for my little bears. And see what other revolutionary out there wants to get married with my little bears.
What a beautiful legacy Betita has left, right? And how she has impacted young people like Jesus. Okay, I hope to be invited to that wedding. Another person that actually follows in the same theme of young people that were impacted by Betita is Clarissa Rojas. She's a spirited warrior sister who crossed paths with Betita 2 decades ago while fighting for better futures and worlds. She's a writer, a teacher, and a mama who believes the creative spirit will save us. And I was in one of those webinars with Clarissa and other young people who said they became professors in the university because of Betita, because they knew that they needed to continue to teach her teachings. So, Clarissa Rojas.
Hola, saludos, buenas tardes a todos. Gracias a los músicos, mi familia de Caléxico, por estar con nosotros. Y Betita presente, se siente, ¿no? Se siente. We feel her with us. So I'm so moved by all the words and the storytelling. You know, I got to know Betita. Actually, my initial experience with Betita was in this sort of incredible way that you just named, Olga, this conversation between you, Angela, and Betita at Oaks College, long time, 1990s, I think I was an undergrad, early 90s. And it would be another few years, maybe now over 20 years, before I would really meet Betita and spend time with her organizing and working. But let me tell you, when I met her, finally in person, we started to do this work together, we hit the ground running. She was ready, and you know, her indomitable wit and comedic sensibility and spirit, just, I was enlivened by it and said, okay, where are we going? What are we doing? Let's go. Vamos, no? And so I joined, and we found ourselves everywhere, from the mission organizing here, South Africa, the World Conference Against Racism. And she was a real sounding board at the time for the organizing I was doing with Insight, some organizing here locally. And she was always just this incredible guide with which to have conversation, to strategize what the next move was or the next failure had been, right? Learning from that one. So, you know, not long after she passed, I felt, like many said, I think Tony in particular, that nudge on my shoulder that said, come on, here's a story I want you to tell, you know, go write my story. And so I've been telling her story and gathering with folks to tell her story ever since then, trying to do my part to sort of reach new audiences and new generations that she, I really believe sincerely, she has been pressing me to help her reach. We need that kind of spirit and guide still in the present moment. And so some of you can visit an exhibit that we just finished, wrapped up that now is online, accessible online through the UC Davis library. You can just Google the UC Davis Betita Martinez, and it'll come up, or the link maybe can come up. So one of the things I want to talk about, because so much of what's been said is just captures so much about Betita's impact and legacy, right? One of the things that I'm struck by that I haven't yet written about, but I've been thinking a lot about, is that, you know, Betita was writing and doing this work, whether, you know, it was in different newspapers, El Grito, or documenting in different ways, using the techniques, what would eventually become methodologies of the not yet emergent, right, soon to be born. We're now in the era of celebrating ethnic studies and gender studies anniversaries, right? And she was doing the work of oral history, testimonio, having mujeres write their stories, and having those mobilize a certain knowledge production that hadn't quite yet been written and that had been kept silent. And I believe that has, in some ways, inspired what has then grown into being some of these guiding methods within these fields of study. So we have community-based research, for example. It's movement-based work, right? Be connected to the community, listen to the community, right? Tell your stories. So the story of Betita, I also want to say in particular, as someone who's Chicana, is the story of us as Chicanx peoples. It's the story of trying to make sense of who we are when the social landscape does not reflect who we are. Betita learned the art of kaleidoscoping early on, of adjusting color and surroundings until she was able to see herself, to be herself, until the histories and the entrapments of colonialism, white supremacy, and heteropatriarchy were refracted into oblivion in her revolutionary imagination. And she was free. Free to organize, free to dream, free to write. Free. Gone were the 30-foot border walls, the detention centers kidnapping babies, the bullets finding black and brown bodies, the sizzling trunks, cajuelas stacking migrant sardine bodies, breathing their last hope is not enough. Betita knew that, so she toiled the midnight oil, dreaming up schemes and new paths to be free. Betita wanted to be free. Betita, your story is our story. Betita, you taught us we are the revolution. And so I give you so many gracias, Betita. I love that rendition of that song. Gracias, Betita. Y gracias a todas las abuelitas. We will continue your long struggle for justice until all our peoples can live freely, leading heart-centered lives that care and nurture our peoples, our wellness, and our children, and our futures. Gracias, Betita. Betita presente.
It is a beautiful site that is at the UC Davis library. Definitely check it out with lots of beautiful testimonies from, especially from young people. So we're gonna shift from the younger generation and go back to the older generation and bring up one of my oldest friends. So you know it's gotta be old. But he and I met in a class, in the Latin American class at UC Santa Cruz in 1969. And thank goodness for that class, because we have been lifelong accomplices and co-conspirators and just, party friends, just like to party. But, and spend so much time with Betita that that's another thing that binds us, is our love for Betita. So Ed McCann dedicated his book, Art and Social Movements, Cultural Politics in Mexico and Aztlán, to Betita. He has been a close friend and a comrade of Betita since the mid-1970s. Please welcome Ed McCann.
Gracias, Betita. The legend of Betita's miniskirts and silver jewelry reached me years before we actually met. Eddie Escobedo, a close college friend at UC Santa Cruz, had seen Betita in action at a Chicano movement gathering somewhere in the Southwest and regaled me with effusive descriptions of her attire. We finally met in the mid-70s in the NACLA offices in Berkeley, when Betita was looking to escape a toxic personal and political scene in Albuquerque. I immediately sensed that we might become good friends, and soon enough we were neighbors in Oakland, living in movement houses on either side of the Telegraph Avenue. Betita, with Olga Talmante, Leonardo Cruz, and Maria Costa in a flat on the east side of the Telegraph, and Peter Baird, Bob Barber, and I in another on the west side. Even though we were both intensely active in the Bay Area left, my memories of those days are not of political discussions. Rather, I recall Betita preparing steak and sauteed mushrooms for the boys on the west side of South Carolina. The first of her many lessons about how to live a life of activism without giving up life's sweet pleasures. Another memory from those early days of our friendship. I admired a photo of her daughter Tessa on her shelf, and Betita said, "Yes, isn't she delicious?" She was. She is. And soon enough, Tessa and I developed our own sweet relationship. Those were also the days when Betita put Peter and I in touch with artist Renee Templeton, who soon became another cherished friend. Gracias, Betita. Later, Betita and I worked together closely on the various publications of the Democratic Workers' Party, where she gave me and others master classes in editing, layout, design, graphic, photography, and history. I had the privilege of co-authoring one article with her that 30 years later is still being taught in university classes. It was called Mexicanas and Chicanas within a transnational working class. One year, Betita and I were sent to represent the Democratic Workers' Party at an international congress of the Mexican Communist Party in Mexico City. Communist Party militants gathered from all corners of the world. In the hotel where delegates were housed, as Betita was unpacking her suitcase, she pulled out 2 candles. "Why the candles?" I asked. "Are you worried about a power outage?" "No," she laughed. "I always travel with candles because you never know when there's going to be a chance for a romantic evening." Again, the same lesson. Don't miss out on life's pleasures while trying to make a revolution. I remember her saying more than once, "After the revolution, there'll be champagne and oysters for la gente." Not yet, Betita.
Yeah, right.
Not yet. Betita and I remained close friends and comrades for more than 40 years. My husband, John Kane, painted her portrait. I dedicated my book to her. And over the decades, she and I seldom passed up a chance to share a martini, a glass of wine, a movie, or a ballet in between stints in the trenches. Gracias, Betita.
I'm not sure we can remember all of the political lessons from Betita, but we do remember how to make martinis. So, so glad to bring up another of Betita's good friends. I would say she considered you her mentee. And another one of those young academics that were totally influenced by Betita. Jason Ferreira is an associate professor of race and resistance studies in the Historic College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State, one of the co-founders of the Institute for Multiracial Justice with Betita, and co-conspirator with her on her spy novel. So I want to hear more about that, Jason.
Hello, everyone. Spy novel. Just real quickly, spy novel. Everybody used to tell Betita, you have to tell your story, Betita. You have to tell your story. I don't have time to, there's too much work to be done. She said, I remember Phil Hutchings would say, but Betita, if you don't tell it, somebody else is gonna tell it in a way that you might not necessarily like. She said, okay. So her and I would sit down and we would record her telling her story. And she would always say that when this thing gets published, she had visions of it being like Eduardo Galeano's Nice to Love and War, right? These little vignettes, right? And that her life was like, it would be like a spy novel, her little insights into history. How I met Betita. I met Betita, I interacted with Betita first in the sort of late 80s, early 90s. I was an undergraduate at the University of Illinois. And we were organizing there for Latino studies to eliminate the racist mascot, Chief Illini. And actually it was building up. It was building up, and we wanted to get our story out. And maybe not in this room, but maybe people on Facebook who might be a little bit younger than me. We didn't have social media. I don't even think we used email all that much back at that time. It wasn't as ubiquitous as it is today. So how do we get our story out? Well, there was this person who wrote in Z Magazine, right, alongside Manny Marable, Bell Hooks, by the name of Betita Martinez. And we said, let's get Betita Martinez to tell our story, right? And so, old school, we called her up, and she was amazing, right? I mean, I don't know if people remember, but she wrote this piece in 1990 called Chingon Politics Dies Hard. That's the other thing about Betita. She could be rigorous, as Angela was saying, and hilarious in the same breath, right? And so she wrote this piece called Chingon Politics Dies Hard, where she just absolutely skewered the machos in the movement. She called them Chingon dinosaurs for their sexism, but also for us who were doing organizing there, the way that she could negotiate, the critique of patriarchy, the critique of narrow nationalism, and the critique of the left in its narrow sort of white formulations was just a breath of fresh air for us, who we were trying to figure things out as ourselves. So as I say, we called her up and we were like, hey, this is building up. So we're going to be occupying a building pretty soon. And she said, okay, I'll do it. But she said, you write the story. You write the story, and then she would make sure it got published in Z Magazine. Because she told us, she said, no one can tell the story better than the people who are living it. And at the time, we didn't know it, but I think about it now, and in fact, she was living the critique she was making in that article, Chingon Politics Dies Hard. In that piece, she says, leadership that empowers others is the leadership that we need. And making space for us at Z, she was also, to be quite honest with you, challenging us to stretch our capacities. Which, to be honest, and it's kind of come up in a couple times here today, was not always easy. I don't know if anyone's ever been on the other end of an intense political disagreement with Betita or an editorial decision. I'm sympathetic. But she was pushing us to develop our own capacities as young activists, as young radicals. And so one of the first lessons from Betita's life, and this is before I even met her, was just her fierce and unflagging faith in youth, in the next generation. But she did so in a way that never romanticized youth, as if youth had all the answers, were never wrong. But she knew that without them, I don't say them now because it's great. I don't think I can call myself youth anymore. But without them, without their dreams, without their visions, without their ideas, without their contributions, and yes, even their mistakes, the revolution, social transformation that was necessary, which she called, and it's important to note, which she called socialism, that would remain elusive. So then come the early 1990s, I move out here to the Bay Area to go to grad school, and Betita welcomes me with open arms. And it's there where our friendship, our comradeship deepened. Betita brought me into, this, you know, she connected us, and she connected, I felt honored to be connected to a whole generation of long distance runners, long distance revolutionaries. Miriam Ching Louie, Phil Hutchings, Angela Davis, I mean, just names that are legendary, but also people of my own generation, right? Eric Quesada, well, she introduced me to Eric Quesada, but there was a whole group of young folk too that sort of cohered around Betita. And some of us formed the Institute for Multiracial Justice, some of us also formed the Center for Political Education. It really emerged in a moment to address the crises of the 90s, right? The crises of the left, right? And some of us dedicate ourselves to building the left in the Center for Political Education, and to also addressing the divides between communities of color, to reignite something that was once called Third World Unity, and that was what we built in the Institute for Multiracial Justice. Betita taught what it looked like and the necessity for being a long-distance runner in the movement, whether the ups and downs, the vicissitudes of struggle. Betita always kept her mind, kept her eyes on freedom. Freedom not confined to just one group, but to all groups, and that was the Institute. That was Shades of Power. To talk with Betita, to work with Betita, was to touch history of a Mexican revolution that her father shared stories of around the kitchen table, to African decolonization campaigns of the United Nations in the 50s, to brushes with Che Guevara himself on the steps of the Habana Libre, to escapades with Soviet poets, and awkward encounters with famous filmmakers like Ingmar Bergman, to stories upon stories upon stories of the bravery of the SNCC, and to run-ins with Tijerina in New Mexico, and to running supplies to Wounded Knee. In short, one felt connected to, responsible to even, a very long and expansive movement, stretching across time and space, or as the Zapatistas like to say, across geographies and cultures, calendars. By way of conclusion, Jesus mentioned that long hallway. For me, the memory of all our many meetings there was this picture that she had in her living room. And it was a picture of a young woman with her fist in the air. And it was an image of a Chilean woman. The look on her face, the joy that was in. Does anybody know this picture that I'm talking about? The militancy with her fist raised in the air. This picture was taken at a rally on September 4th, 1973, about 1 week before the overthrow of the Allende government by the fascists and the CIA-sponsored coup of Pinochet, in which that dream, that vision that sister had in the streets of Santiago, I would imagine, were crushed. And above that picture was a line. Un mundo marcha al sitio donde tú ibas, hermana. A world marches to the place where you were going, sister. That was stuck with me. It still sticks with me. Turns out that line is a line from a poem written by Pablo Neruda on the occasion of Tina Modoti's death. For those, Tina Modoti, the comrade of Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo, the comrade of and partner of Julio Antonio Mella in Cuba, the founder of the Cuban Communist Party. And I want to share an excerpt from a little bit more of that poem, just as a way of concluding. If I can find it here real quick. A world marches to the place where you were going, sister. The songs of your mouth advance each day. In the mouths of the glorious people that you loved, your heart was brave. In the old kitchens of your country, on the dusty rows, something is said and passes on. Something returns to the flame of your golden people. Something awakes and sings. They are your people, sister. Those who today speak your name. We who from everywhere, from the water and the land, with your name leave unspoken and speak other names, because fire does not die. let's all keep that fire lit, and as I'm sure Betita would say, let's fan those flames and continue marching with Betita.
Well, I think we've been schooled by Professor Jason Ferreira, schooled in the Betita way. And, working at Chicana Latina Foundation with young Latina college students brought me even closer to Betita because of her love for young people. And particularly in this case, the Latinas that are part of Chicana Latina Foundation, where she came and spoke several times. And she has a very dear space and place in our hearts there. There's a scholarship that is endowed by our good friend Bob Barber in Betita Martinez's name. And the student that receives that scholarship is a graduate student every year that works across movements to bring people together, as clearly she has done, with Jason and others. So we're very proud to have that scholarship. We're going to bring someone that was one of, I think, Betita's favorite co-conspirators. I've referred to Max that way. Max Album. He is on the editorial board of Convergence magazine and co-editor of the new book, Power Concedes Nothing, How Grassroots Organizing Wins Elections.
Wow.
Aren't we hoping that book has been used for the elections 2 days from now? Along with Betita and many others, Max was a co-founder of the War Times Tiempos de Guerra, an anti-war magazine founded soon after 9/11. So Max Album.
Betita was in it for the long haul. Early in life, she decided to devote herself to the cause of social justice and radical change. And once she plunged in, she was all in. She was going to persist as long as nature allowed. She would not stop fighting whatever the enemies of peace, equality, and freedom threw at her. Take the world-changing setbacks at the end of the 1980s. The collapse of the Soviet bloc, the Tiananmen massacre in China, the Sandinistas losing the Nicaraguan election, the demise of the Rainbow Coalition. It was a period of trauma for the left, but Betita didn't step back. On the contrary, she threw herself into an effort to bring together people from once warring parts of the left, to break down the barriers that had divided us, to debate what had gone wrong, and to find a new path. It was in that project, Crossroads Magazine, that I first met and worked with Betita. And saw how she combined passion and savvy and a sense of urgency with an appreciation of historical sweep and how long it takes to make change. Then 9/11, when Betita was already in her mid-70s. It was another period of trauma. And again, Betita did not flinch. She was the founder and editor of War Times Tiempo de Guerra, which opposed the war on terror and all the racist hate mongering that went along with it. She wrote, she strategized, she poured her energy into spreading the message of peace with justice and of the unity of peoples across the world, the necessity of solidarity between the anti-war movement here and suffering peoples across the globe. There was one article she wrote during that period of which she was especially proud. The piece was a reflection on the killing of the bell ringer of the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem by an Israeli sniper. The murder touched something deep, deep inside Betita. When she shared the piece to the other editors before it went into production, she could not keep the tears from flowing down her cheeks as she read the eloquent line, "They killed the bell ringer, but some of us will always hear it." She stuck with that project well into her 80s, despite increasing frailty. The last political meeting she was able to attend due to her physical health was one devoted to orienting a group of young activists who had joined the project, some almost 60 years younger than she was. They were just beginning their journeys as radical journalists. She not only shared her wisdom, she inspired them. We're again at a period of trauma. Racist authoritarianism and fascism are on the rise worldwide, vowing shamelessly to destroy everything Betita and all of us in this room hold dear. Betita's never surrender spirit, her lifelong commitment to fight and fight harder when the going gets tougher, is a source of comfort, of strength, of hope for every one of us as we do what needs to be done today.
Thank you.
I can do this. Can you, Harley? Harley, one of our technicians here at the Bravo Theater. Thank you, Harley. So I have two more statements to read from people that could not be here tonight. And then we're gonna bring back our community songbirds, singers. This is from someone that worked very closely with Betita for many years. She couldn't be here today, but she sent this statement. Linda Burnham. I so regret that I won't be able to join you to celebrate the life of our Betita, our fierce, beautiful, mischievous, sassy, stubborn, wise, red lipstick and earrings, always committed to a lifetime of struggle, Betita. She made her mark on so many of our organizations and movements, and I am deeply grateful that our paths met and we walked on together for some decades. I can still see her brilliant smile. Our sister is profoundly missed. Her work lives on. That's from Linda Burnham. And this is a statement sent by our good friend and good sister, hermana Sherry Moraga. Yes. Querida Betita, I am a believer in ancestors. I believe your life matters, your works matter, your body matters, as it moved long-legged and knee-deep in an ever-turbulent world. We, the generation just after you, stumble following to keep up with your footsteps, for your life testifies to the best of politics. You who used your skill and your privileges to define by living praxis the words coalition and solidaridad. Not the weak-kneed rhetoric of allyship we hear today that can so easily fall from the tongue into media meaninglessness. No, your words and work were derived from tacones underground trabajo in Cuba, in Nueva York, throughout the South and the Southwest. Your origin story is one of a particular kind of access in an era when Spanish surnames alone would garner you discrimination. Wasn't it enough to be a woman? So you strategized wisely and used the access that your maternal Scottish surname afforded you to make a bridge of your back. and there were plenty walking over it. Men, women, black, white, and then of course, there's always compromise, always obstacles and concessions to them. There are always the ever acts of translation until the day arrives when you stand up and say, I'm going home. And Betita Martinez said adios to Liz Sutherland and returned to us. The courage it took to do that. I remember that moment in my own life, my güera face, this is Shereen speaking, turning into my cultura. But you came into this world a full generation before me, before us. I observe my young students today who cannot remember a world before plague and unnatural disasters made natural. But I remember you, who embodies all of what I understand as radical, that root forged by way of inheritance. Your father who bore witness to Mexico's revolt more than a full century ago, as you mentioned, Jason. You wanted the same in your own life. And so you grew to bear activist witness to a world where Black became beautiful. War was momentarily suspended, and socialism was not always a dirty word. As a sister-daughter writer, I honor how language served you as your weapon and tool for radical transformation throughout every stage of movement work. From the UN to NM, as the Nuevo Mexico and El Movimiento Chicano. As an author, your insistence on grounding political praxis in the material conditions of our lives created in you an ever activist historian. Without such evidence, how do we imagine the future? As an editor and periodista, your signature gift was to weld the words of others into a collective voice of liberatory recall. For all the beauty and struggle of Black liberation, what was missing in the picture was you, Betita Martinez, and its radicalism took you home to Aztlán and to your own revolution. And Raza remains ever grateful for even in that fragile side of nationhood, we still attempt to coalesce with those of every shade and gender, with pockets full and empty wallets, with womanhood at the helm. You knew this before women of color feminism was even a term. You were its predecessor of a kind. What you brought home to Raza was an irreplaceable knowledge of the world, the complex struggle for liberation, its grand failures and intimate successes. What my students sometimes don't understand is that the wanting is what moves the body to act, to risk, to change. And you never stopped wanting revolution. Siempre, Sherry Moraga. And you can see why Betita and Sherry were so close and shared so much. We are going to bring up the singers, and we're going to bring up Tessa.
Just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And gracias, músicos.
So, Francisco Herrera, José Roberto Hernández, Liliana Herrera. And Liliana and Francisco in particular are known to us as the community songbirds. They created, wrote, and performed, and still perform a song called Our Children Are Sacred, which came about because of the children that were separated at the border, and that many of us here work with Caravana for the Children that I help to coordinate as well. And so the community songbirds are here with us, and are we so lucky to have you. Thank you very much. That will end our program, and we'll end it with a song, and then we'll continue singing and dancing and partaking and eating and drinking. Thank you very much, all of you.
As our closing, so we celebrated many times los cumpleaños, the birthdays. special celebrations with Betita. And so we sat down with Tessa and said, pues, of all those many songs we did together, what do you think we should be? How should we close that we celebrated many times Betita's birthdays and special celebrations together. And so we sat down with with Tessa and said, pues cómo le cerramos, Betita? What are some of the songs? So we put together a little booklet of that. I want to thank especially my good brother Douglas Norberg over there in Paulette, who put with Collision Course Video put together the film of the book of 450 years of Chicano history. Thank you, Doug, for all that work. No sé si. So these are two of Betita's favorite songs, of which there were many, because she did enjoy the pleasures of life.
And always supported artists.
As we worked the revolution. Entonces dice así. Cuando salí de La Habana, válgame Dios, nadie me miró salir si no fui yo. Una linda guachinanga, válgame Dios, se vino detrás de mí, ay sí señor. Hacia tu ventana llega una paloma, trátala con cariño, que es mi persona. Cuéntale tus amores, bien de mi vida. Coronala de flores, que es cosa mía. Ay, chinita que sí, ay, quédame tu amor, ay, que vente conmigo, chinita, a donde vivo yo. Betita linda, eres volando, viene cantando tu corazón. Betita hermosa, eres mi encanto, te celebramos en la misión.
¡Que viva la misión! Tierra del sol.
Suspiro por ver. Ahora que lejos yo vivo sin luz, sin amor. Y al verme tan solo y triste, cual hoja al viento, quisiera llorar, quisiera morir de sentimiento.
Vámonos a la. Qué lejos estoy del suelo donde nací. Intensa nostalgia invade mi pensamiento. Y al verme tan sola y triste, coloca el viento. Quisiera
been a hard day now.